The text for this morning's sermon is from 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 2. Tend to the flock of God that is in your charge, exercising the oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you do. And the theme of the morning's sermon is, don't let the urgent crowd out the important. That is a phrase I've taken from a book newly written by an old friend of mine, actually, named Larry Farris. And Larry has written this book titled 10 Commandments for Pastors New to a Congregation. And he writes that even though there are 10 commandments and the book has 10 chapters, he admits in the foreword that there is really only one commandment for the new pastor. Don't let the urgent crowd out the important. That all the other commandments are variations on this one. He explains how one starts a ministry in a new setting sets the tone for how that ministry will unfold for years to come. Lackadaisical, casual beginnings that mostly repeat what has worked elsewhere often lead to years of drifting and unfocused ministry. On the other hand, high-energy overdrive beginnings often lead to burned-out pastors who soon leave, thinking a move to yet another field of service is their only hope of establishing a ministry of reasonable demands and expectations. Too many changes introduced too quickly in the first few months can lead to congregational resistance and backlash. Too few changes in the early going may mean the opportunity for real change passes, not to return again until the next pastor arrives. The challenges before and demands upon a pastor new to a congregation are usually nothing short of enormous. Thus, it's of first importance that the new pastor not let the urgent crowd out the important. Well, you know the difference between the urgent and the important. The urgent may be shortly defined as that which is most pressing to do immediately in the short term. In fact, the English word urgent comes from a medieval French word which means press. In fact, that's the same medieval French form that goes into the word for wine press. That's what urgency is. It squeezes the juice out of you, doesn't it? It's that which squeezes the juice out of life. Those things that are done urgently are done under compulsion, Peter writes in this Bible passage, or those are the things that are done because you must, as another translation of the New Testament puts it. Contrast that to things that are important. Things that are important are those things that are most worthy and good to do long term. The things that are done willingly, Peter writes, or as another translation puts it, things that are done voluntarily. A great Presbyterian named Dwight Eisenhower, who happened also to be a 5-star general and president of the United States, but really important is that he was Presbyterian. Eisenhower once put it succinctly and famously. He said, "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." Now, when I was first putting the pieces together in this sermon, I thought, well, maybe at this point I should give some illustrations, and I decided I don't need to give any illustrations. Every single person in this room can bring illustrations to the table from your own life. You know from your own life that time spent in the urgent box is time that rarely produces anything great. But time spent in the important box of life, that's the time when great things happen. How often have you found yourself unable to turn to the things in life that are really important because you're stuck on the urgent. The urgent has crowded out the important. So then, for the matter before us this morning and in the weeks and months ahead, what is most important for a pastor to turn to when he or she first comes to a church? Well, here are some ideas. I think the most important thing is to work faithfully and diligently on preaching, because preaching is the pastor's opportunity to relate to most people at one time. So the new preacher must be given time to prepare those early sermons. As well, the new pastor needs to spend time getting to know people, visiting people, getting the lay of the land, learning the culture, finding out where the grocery stores are and the restaurants, how the recycling works. There's no two cities in America that recycle quite the same way. We have to learn the culture. And probably the minister who comes here, we have no idea who that person will be, but the chances are they're not going to come from down the road. They're going to come from Florida or California or Missouri or Texas or, God help us, New Jersey. Well, something's good from New Jersey. And they have to figure out what life is like here. What are the norms? What are the expectations? Betty and I have had fun this year just learning the difference between Bismarck and Fargo. Right? I mean, we spent a lot of our life in Fargo. I guess we were afflicted by imperial caste, right? We just thought of Bismarck as Fargo West. It's a totally different culture. Different values, different expectations, different ways of talking, different ways of doing things. The new pastor has to be given time to learn those things. And of course, most important, the pastor has to have the time and freedom to get settled, particularly if there are children, to get settled in school, spouse employment, all those sorts of things. Getting a driver's license, exchanging credit card address, all these things take time. Now, a pastor has to take some responsibility for that. That is to say, we all have to take ownership of our own lives and take care of ourselves. And yet the congregation's help is of first importance in keeping the new pastor focused on the important and not getting the important pushed out by the urgent. Fred Oakes, in his magnificent book titled How to Start Well as a New Pastor, writes, "Resist the impulse to jump in and get busy. Sure, you are excited about the opportunities of your new setting. You want to prove that you are a hard worker. Members of your congregation are eager to get busy on projects that have been begging for attention. But if your church calendar is stuck on spin cycle, unplug it. Take time to make unhurried, genuine personal connections. Make relationships a priority from day one." But the new pastor can't do that on his or her own. It can only be done with the cooperation of the congregation. We need to help. You need to help. So what can we do as a congregation to help make sure that when the next pastor arrives, the urgent doesn't crowd out the important? Well, several things. First of all, I am eager and delighted to report to you that the pastor nominating committee and the transition advisory team, each of whom have been moving down separate tracks, have at this point in the process begun talking to one another, with the resolve that once a pastor has been identified and called, they will begin working together to surround that person and his or her family with encouragement, love, and support. Now, they're not going to start planning that until the new pastor is identified, because what a new pastor needs by way of encouragement, love, and support will vary on who that new pastor is and what sort of family constellation comes with him or her and so forth. But they have promised that they will begin working together to guide that new pastor and help the pastor become assimilated into this magnificent church and this most excellent community. But here's a second thing we can do, and we've been talking about this in church for several weeks now. We can stock the fridge. We can stock the refrigerator. Now, this is an old tradition in town and country churches. My guess is that a number of you probably grew up in town and country churches where this happened. When a new pastor was arriving, the pantry or the table in the kitchen and the refrigerator was filled with food. So when the pastor arrived, they were ready to get up and running and didn't have to immediately begin running around trying to get the necessities of life. Betty and I had this experience many, many years ago. When I was still in seminary, I spent one summer as a student pastor of a very small church in upstate New York. Actually, it was what New Yorkers call the southern tier of New York on the Pennsylvania border. It was a small country church. Most everybody in the church were farmers, and we actually lived that summer in an apartment that was upstairs in a farmhouse where the people welcomed us in. And when we arrived at this apartment the first day, the kitchen table was stocked with food that the congregation had put there for us. But there was an unusual twist to this. What we later discovered is that at the local grocery store in Hornell, New York, the previous week, they had had a sale on canned pineapple. Buy a canned pineapple, get one free. And so everyone who went shopping thought this would be a fabulous idea for the new pastor. And we had cans after cans after cans of pineapple. That was our pineapple summer, as we would call it. It was a great summer. The number one song that summer was Jim Croce's Bad, Bad Leroy Brown. Anybody remember Bad, Bad Leroy Brown? The number one television show was Barnaby Jones. My Mets were on their way to a World Series that fall. There aren't many summers where that ever happened. Okay? And that was our pineapple summer. We had pineapple chicken salad, pineapple pasta salad, pineapple fruit salad. We had pineapple coffee cake, pineapple upside down cake, pineapple cheesecake. We had burgers with grilled pineapples, pineapple kebabs, pineapple casserole. We dipped our chips in pineapple salsa, had ice cream with pineapple topping, and had pineapple fritters for breakfast. It wasn't all bad. That was the summer I learned how to make pina coladas, and that has held me in good stead. Yeah. And we look back on that and we laugh about it, and it was both funny at the time and it's funny now. But you know what we were able to see? We just didn't see pineapples. We saw a congregation of beautiful, precious, lovely, caring men and women who wanted to welcome us to their church and their community, and who wanted to let us know how important we were by giving us this food, and how important it was that we not feel hurried and pressed and rushed and urgent the minute we got there, running around trying to figure out life for ourselves. We intuitively knew that these people understood the importance of not permitting the urgent to crowd out the important. This was important for them. It was important for us. So what can we do here at First Presbyterian Church, assuming that the pineapple plan is one you don't want to follow? At the very least, let's balance the budget. Now, I say at the very least because the budget itself is a bare bones austerity budget. This year's budget represents deep cuts in staff, mission, community service, congregational outreach, as well as in congregational programs. This is going to be an opportunity and a challenge for the church for years to come. Church leaders, including the pastor going forth, will have major challenges and major opportunities regarding financial support. The PNC is looking for a pastor who's willing and able to take that on. So this is not that. We're not proposing that we solve the church's financial problems for the next 10 years. We expect the new pastor to provide leadership in that area. All we're asking for is let's not burden him or her the day the person arrives with the urgency of raising money to meet this year's budget. Give the pastor time to get around to it. Let the pastor build relationships and preach God's word and cozy into the community. The time to turn to budget issues will come sooner or later. Unfortunately, sooner rather than later. But let's not force this on the person the first few months that he or she is there. Let's give the pastor some breathing room. Now, what would it take? Well, you've heard this in previous Sundays. It would take each pledging unit, not each member, but each pledging unit, about $90 more between now and the end of the year. That's about $3.50 a week. And Don Bigwood 2 weeks ago and Kathy Mayer last Sunday gave you some playful and fun suggestions about things that we spend every day of our lives that are so terribly unimportant. The $3.50 we spend here and there and so forth. If we would simply give this to the church, then we will help the pastor stay with the important and not get caught up in the urgent. Can you do that? Will you do that? You know, $3.50, that's about the cost of 2 cans of pineapple. Now, we're going to ask you today to make a commitment. On each of you were given, when you came in, a little refrigerator container. And they're hard to open unless you find that tab. If you get the tab in the corner, it clicks right open. And we have a refrigerator. Wouldn't you know it? And inside this refrigerator container is a piece of blank paper, and you were given a pencil as well. We're inviting you now to write down some combination of 3 things. First, we would love it if you put the word yes. That means yes, I am pledging to give $90 more than I pledged in order to meet this goal. Or, second of all, and what our Mission and Stewardship Committee would love to see is your ideas of what you're going to do, what you're going to sacrifice, what you're going to give up in order to raise the $3.50. They thought it might be fun to read some of these, and without names, of course, publish them. How can you make that $3.50 a week? But of course, for most of us, that's no sacrifice at all, really. But we'd love to hear some of your creative, interesting, funky and fun ideas about how to raise the $3.50. But third of all, it may be that you're unable or willing to participate in this project. We get that. $90 is throwaway money for many, but it's a critical amount for others. Even if you can't participate in that way, would you take time to write on that piece of paper something you will bring to the next pastor? Perhaps it's the promise to pray for him or her. The promise to attend worship more regularly so the pastor doesn't come and the church is full the first day. It's always full the first day and then begins to empty out in future days. Perhaps it's your resolve to attend Bible studies that the pastor might be holding, or perhaps it's a specific offer to help the pastor in some particular way. But so there's 3 things, and you can answer all 3, or just 1 or 2 or 3. Put the answer yes, or indicate and or what you're giving up, and or say what else you're going to bring to stock the refrigerator for the new pastor. But I also know it's going to take a minute or 2 for you to think about that and write about it. So before we ask you to come forward, I'm going to talk just a little bit more about Moses and Aaron in the magnificent reading that Dan read earlier in this service. And you can write while I'm talking. How many times does a preacher give you permission to do that? Right? Just pay no attention to me, just write. You know the story. Moses went up the mountaintop, Mount Sinai, to receive the 10 Commandments. leaving at the foot of the mountain the people who were waiting for him, and they were under the leadership then of Moses' assistant, Aaron. The congregation waiting for Moses became anxious. Anxiety never produces anything worthwhile. When people are anxious, they begin saying things they shouldn't say and doing things they shouldn't do. One of the most important things for church leaders and church members to have is the grace to be calm and courageous when there's anxiety breaking out all around. I like to think of it as the Christmas tree lights. Some of you are old enough, like I am, to remember the old Christmas tree lights when if one bulb went out, the whole string of lights went out. And the new bulbs, the new strings of light, is if one bulb goes out, the rest of the bulbs keep shining, right? Anxiety is like the first Christmas tree string. If one person begins acting anxious and behaving badly, everybody around them kind of gets it and begins going out and flashing and behaving badly. But when there's a calm, courageous atmosphere, then if one person shorts out, everybody else continues to shine. That's what churches need, is the ability to be calm and courageous in anxious times. Well, Aaron did not have the right stuff to communicate a calm, courageous ethos when people were getting anxious. And so people were worried and anxious because, in their opinion, Moses has been top of the mountain too long. They were impatient. Well, why on earth would they be impatient? Normally in life, we become impatient when something we normally do takes longer than we normally expect, but nobody had ever gone to a mountaintop to encounter God before. So what's the standard for how long that ought to take, really? There is no standard. But it's human nature to be anxious, to be impatient, to put pressure on one another. Say, we got to do something. We got to get something done. And so they turn to Aaron, do something, say something, take charge. The great ballet dancer and teacher of dancers, George Balanchine, is famous for teaching young ballet students, when in doubt, spin. That may or may not be good advice for ballet. It's almost always bad advice for everyone else. When in doubt, don't spin. When in doubt, hold your place. Be calm and courageous. But like I say, Aaron couldn't make that happen. And when they insisted that they do something, they wanted to build a bronze statue, an idol to another god. Aaron said, why would we build a statue to another god? We don't believe in that God. Well, we're open now. We're open to considering other gods because the God, our God, seems to have let us down. Let's do something. We've got to do something. That's what anxiety breeds. And so they build the bronze statue. But then when Moses came down from the mountain, this is one of the most moving moments in the story, I think. He was angry. He said to Aaron, how could this happen? And Aaron said to him, you know the people. You know people. I hope that if I have reason to come back to Bismarck, say 3 months after my interim ministry is done, and I run into your new pastor and he seems, or she appears to be flustered and out of breath and frustrated, and I say, what happened? How could you let the urgent crowd out the important, that new pastor wouldn't simply say, Rick, you know the people. You know the people. You've been here. Because I do know the people. And I know you don't want that to happen. You want the next pastor to be faithful and effective and successful. And we have within us the means to help make that happen. And this fun thing we're doing today, that by itself can't make it happen, but it's a step in the right direction. It's our way of saying to one another and saying to that next pastor, we want you to turn your faithful and creative energies to the important and not to get distracted by the urgent. One last thing. The new Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, Pope Francis, this last week, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday, was his 100th day in office. And so he's beginning to feel pressure to do stuff. Everybody's got an agenda. Conservative Catholics want him to start doing stuff, to bring the church back to its conservative roots. Liberal progressive Catholics say, we're waited long enough, Francis. We want you to do stuff, to bring the church into the modern world. But I read an article by Paolo Rodari, who's a Vatican expert who writes on Vatican affairs for the Italian newspaper La Repubblica. And he wrote this about the new Pope. He wrote, Christianity is more than anything a style. And Francis has brought his own style as a pastor. He's leading by example. There will be many, many changes in the coming months, but there's plenty of time for that. But what the Pope is doing now is putting his stamp on the papacy, and that will have an impact when he takes on more temporal issues. Please join one another and join me in giving the next pastor time to put his or her stamp on this ministry, because that will be very worthwhile when he or she later turns attention to more temporal matters. Well, this is like a rain delay in baseball. I've talked on to give you time to fill out those papers, to put them back in the plastic refrigerator container. And as Jan plays, what better song could it be? Simple Gifts. I invite you to come forward and to place your resolve in our refrigerator.